through the topological diagrams it associates with the movement of destructive plasticity. From the chiasmus of the passion for destruction is creative passion too. The original German reconstitutes a properly dialectical Moebius strip. The first notable difference between the English and the German iterations of Bakunin's proclamation is the return of the term lust, or desire, in place of passion. The second is the explicit reference to time, rendered more evident by the German than the English. Finally, there is the question of the central adjective creative. Destructive plasticity lies somewhere between Schaffende, or the active intervention of praxis, and Schumpeter's Schöpferische, used more commonly to denote ideational innovation. The principal event is destruction. The softening of Bakunin's message as destructive creation derives from the same liberal impulse as the reductive plasticity that Malabou writes against. According to biblical scholars, it is the lack of a clearly marked third space at the center of chiastic opposition that renders the chiasmus inert. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. Is this not an example of, this is not, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, is thus not an example of true chiasmus. Whereas whoever sheds the blood of man, by man will his blood be shed, is considered a better example of chiastic dynamism. When cerebrality is added as the third term in Bakunin's chiasmus, the result is the difference between the empty protest of beautiful souls and the destructive plasticity of radical refusal. Among the notes in Marcel Duchamp's Boîte Verte, published in 1934, but written for years earlier, is a drawing labeled Exhaust of the Pump, and an inscription that reads, "Try to argue on the plastic duration." Are Duchamp's plastic duration and his musical sculpture of brain facts, or civilité, an indicator that Malabou's timely theorization of destructive plasticity is simply the new liberal materialization of anarcho-communism's specter in the brain? The result of a 100-year process of anarchism's aestheticization that reaches its threshold with the present aestheticization of Marxism? At the time when the Bakunin-Elisard article was in circulation, the terms penis cerebris and cerebris vulva were still used to identify areas of the brain in anatomical treatises. In the early 18th century, a number of anatomists had begun to object to sexuation of the brain as indecent, a sign of the impudence of the ancients. In the mid-19th century, references to erogenous zones began to be replaced with more appropriate alternatives. The penis cerebris became the pineal gland, the cerebris vulva the common anterior opening. In the Baroque imagination, the brain was a nautilus-like living fossil, the evolutionary remnant of Aristophanes' hermaphrodite descended from the heavens to be encased in the shell of a human skull. In the late 20th century, brain scientists would speculate on why philosopher René Descartes had selected the pineal gland as the seat of the soul. Descartes writes that he privileged the pineal gland on account of its oneness. Unlike the rest of the brain, it was not doubled, and was therefore the only place where the dualities of the rest of the brain structure would resolve themselves in chiasmus. Late 20th century scholars would argue, however, that like the pineal gland, the pituitary was also a singular structure. And yet the pituitary had been overlooked. The mystic Emanuel Swedenborg's treatise, the only philosophical work dedicated exclusively to the brain to precede Malabou's, provides some insight. In it, the 20th century recounts the 16th century's interest in brain movement by the same neuroanatomist, Realdo Colombo, said to have discovered the clitoris, and who also coined the term cerebris vulva. Similarly, Descartes was also fascinated by brain movement. In states of sleep, he wrote that the brain went slack or limp, only to, in states of wakefulness, expand and contract in response to external stimulation. Descartes would also assert that though the soul should not really be imagined as localized in any one area of the brain, the human need for divine right and centralized authority could be thought of as having a microcosmic counterpart in the brain as control center of the body. The brain has never not been a biopolitical emblem. In conclusion, in the early 21st century, new liberal biopolitics finds comic relief in naughty mannerist neuroanatomy, how the brain got its buttocks. While it works all the while to naturalize sexual difference in neural networks, male and female brains work differently, scans reveal. This recent recovery of the lost history of the brain's 16th century sexuation signals a deadlock in thinking about the sexual relationship and the image of the mind in the brain. Sexuality and cerebrality are Malabou's sensitivity to this deadlock. However, it is not that the libido is the drive of sexuality and destructive plasticity, the drive of cerebrality. Cerebrality and sexuality are not autonomous entities on either side of a chiasmus, nor are they two sides of a Moebius strip that can never meet though structurally joined. Instead, it would seem that the logic of cerebrality and sexuality is that of ecstasis, the baseline quality of movement we've articulated in our image atlas. So I'm concluding here, where I really am. In Lacan's formula of sexuation, psychoanalysis created a new image of the plastic subject by liberating Aristotle's logical square from the cliché of a horizontal swing, left to right, to a vertical and diagonal spiraling. The most important ramification of this operation is what Zizek calls its positivization of impossibility, the affirmative negativity of the there is a non-relationship. The result is a brain organ that is paradoxical transfinite object, which overlaps with its own lack of this shift in logic, an excess with regard to itself, the less than nothing of destructive plasticity and cerebrality. Might this tactical use of biological concepts be an escape route through neuroanatomy to refusing new liberal models of the human for an anarcho-communist inhuman? With destructive plasticity and the post-traumatic subject, the brain organ is transformed from new liberal phallus to new materialist parallax, a gap within which entryist moles can burrow to refuse the mass internalization of new liberal biopolitics. In 2013, this photograph of Emmy Hennings's Arachne performance began circulating on the internet. Scanned from a volume entitled Dada's Women, the photograph was posted by a user of the popular social networking tool Tumblr. In the post, the photograph is accompanied by a passage from the performance extracted from Henning's diary. Eternal truth comes from me, of course, and I find it comical. And that it should come so cheap, as if what we demand were not worth much. A theater death, a real variety death, would be the right thing for me. One would really like to be the truth, not only appear to be it. And if I were to be found entangled in my net, I would be the truth, masked to the very last. We believe in the proven truth of illusion. In the photograph, Henning's head is the body of the spider. Her closed eyes are shielded under the shadow cast by the brocaded rim of a large cap. The eternal truth is a living dead decapitated head, a blind face that has sprouted spindly legs and sits on a web only as large as its body. In Hennings's theater death, the proven truth of illusion is the death mask that returns the decapitated head to life as a spider. The neurocerebral system of the brain is the only organ necessary to sustain this form of undead, this positivized negativity that supports itself economically by selling the ecstasis of eternal truth. Universal truth is accessible only from a partial engaged subjective position, a deep entryist neuroaesthetics.